Welcome back to Vox Terra. Listen, this headline I'm going to share with you should have been screaming news everywhere, and it's really pathetic and sad that it wasn't and isn't. This is a headline from physics.org. Global pollution kills 9 million people a year. Study finds. By Seth Borenstein of May 18th, 2022. Now, they're citing to a study published in Lancet Planetary Health. So the Lancet claims that 9 million deaths per year directly tied to pollution. We're not talking indirect here like climate change or that kind of thing, but directly like breathing stuff in, being exposed to chemicals. That amounts to 1 out of 6 deaths worldwide. And according to that physics.org article, the U.S. is ranking number 7 in pollution-related deaths. Well, why isn't that screaming headline news? We're in the number 7. Now, here's why I really want to focus on this just pollution-related deaths, because listen to this line from Lancet. They said addressing pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change are all linked. Okay, and I really want to highlight that for you because so many times when I've had my discussions or debates, the climate deniers, climate dismissers, they're like, well, I care about other pollution, but, I don't, this climate change, blah, blah. No, it's all the same thing, dude. It's all the same thing, okay? We're talking about the same fossil fuel industries, petrochemicals, just the overuse of all this stuff, the no desire to switch away. The environmental movement only started switching to climate change because it's coming down like a ton of bricks. Okay, we can't afford to ignore it. It would have been easier for me if I could have just been telling you, hey, it's bad to breathe in all this gasoline. We should switch away from it. That would have been way easier life. And if you read their review, you can hear the frustration. They say we're going backwards. So when they're talking about pollution, here's some of the categories they're talking about. In the air, particulate matter from fossil fuels, ozone and oxides of nitrogen and sulfur. So ozone is formed by a mix of different chemical reactions in the air, largely from different types of fossil fuel burning like gasoline and power plants. And then that's when it's exposed to heat and light, you get ozone. Oxides of nitrogen and sulfur I looked into for you are also from the burning of gasoline and coal. And they're components of smog and acid rain. In the oceans, they're looking at mercury, which is coming from coal again, I believe. Nitrogen, phosphorus, which are coming from non-sustainable agricultural practices, plastics and petroleum waste. Again, we're back to that fossil fuel petrochemical industry. And in the land, they're talking about lead, mercury, pesticides, industrial chemicals, and radioactive waste. So remember, nuclear power has never been the first choice of any of the major environmental groups I'm aware of. And pesticides and a lot of these industrial chemicals, I believe, are also, their feedstock chemical is coming from, petroleum or some kind of fossil fuel base, natural gas. Now, the Lancet points out something I've heard before. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. The chemical hazard, their compilations of deaths from chemical hazards are probably way too low because you know what? Few agencies are really tracking, doing good studies on all these chemicals we're being exposed to in the workplace, in the products we use, with so little regard to how can we make non-toxic products. I mean, that should be the priority. And my understanding is that in the U.S., chemicals are basically innocent until proven guilty, and a lot of the studies that, for them to get EPA approval are coming from industry themselves. And there's a whole ocean of chemicals that have never been tested because they're just grandfathered in and on the market. Now, Lancet lists some ominous-sounding categories and subcategories, and I just want to highlight a couple just to, put it in your brain, your cabeza, that, pollution's real. This is a real thing that the media is just underemphasizing. One cool title, The Intersection of Climate Change and Air Pollution. Both problems come largely from the same source, fossil fuel burning or biofuel burning. I just want to highlight that again because, again, it's like you say you care about pollution, but you think climate change is a hoax. Well, it's the same thing. And biofuels are also not a first choice for environmental groups. Another example, that particulate matter from auto exhaust and diesel, truck diesel, it contains things that are harmful to our lungs and our cardiovascular system, hurts our immunity to diseases, apparently, lowers our immune system, all kinds of other health effects. It contains carcinogens, and it's putting out heat-trapping greenhouse gases. They got another headline, The Silent Threat of Chemical Pollution. I love that category, that title, because you know what? That's really 80% of the problem here is that a lot of the pollutants nowadays are invisible. It isn't like this 1950s when you could see soot everywhere. We can't see this stuff. Now listen to some of these subcategories of harm from the chemical industry. Developmental neurotoxicity of chemicals. Developmental neurotoxicity means it's harming the nervous systems of children and fetuses. Reproductive toxicity of chemicals. And here they're talking breast cancer, testicular cancer, or harms to our reproductive systems. So I think if more social conservatives were aware of this stuff, maybe they'd be taking the environment more seriously and realize their voting choices aren't as clear as they might think. Immunotoxicity of chemicals. That means damage to the immune system. You're exposed to stuff, your immune system gets weaker. Well, it's the same with air pollution. So you're more likely to get sick when exposed. Now, they've got these things that I call death charts where they're just showing how many people are dying from pollution. So this one I want to share with you. They call it Global Estimated Pollution Attributable Deaths in the Millions by Type of Pollution and Sex. And it's for 2019, but they point out if you read the report, things are only getting worse. Total air pollution, 6.7 million deaths. Occupational carcinogens and particulate matter, 870,000 annual deaths. Now they also got what I call a comparison death chart, where they're comparing deaths from different sources. But what's really interesting here, if you consider the indirect causes, how some of these are indirectly related to pollution, then really you could tie in a lot of this with pollution, even the ones they're saying are not pollution-related deaths. If you look at this stat, death from pollution is higher than death from smoking and secondhand smoking worldwide. Next, they got malnutrition, around 3 million deaths. And what you want to think about here, now you can think about the climate-related effects and the sustainable agriculture effects. So climate-related, we're getting more of this extreme weather, just dry, wet, flood. It's harder to grow crops. It's getting harder to grow crops, and everything's changing so much now that where do you plant this and where do you plant that? But even in a more general sense, think about agriculture. Environmental groups have largely been calling for sustainable, local, regional-based agriculture and food systems. So you got this food system based on shipping things all over the planet. I mean, and then you got malnutrition coming in. So it's still tied, even that malnutrition tied back to the environment or lack of environmental stewardship. Drug and alcohol abuse. Okay, I'm going to stretch you a little here, but why not? I mean, if you're getting hit with like storms now you didn't used to, your home's destroyed because of this climate change, you're getting exposed to carcinogens and chemicals, you got loved ones getting sick, you're unhealthy. Wouldn't that seem like a lot of this stuff is going to lead towards drug and alcohol abuse? Next category, AIDS, TB, malaria, about 3 million. Well, here I've shown you in other videos, climate change, the heating planet is changing what's called disease vectors, how disease is being spread. You got malaria carrying mosquitoes or tropical mosquitoes now able to inhabit other areas. You got disease bearing ticks moving into different regions they didn't used to. Plus, our immune systems are weakened by exposure to these chemicals and air pollution, so we're more likely to get sicknesses. Road injuries, deaths from road injuries. Well, think about that one. And pollution. Okay, you got road injuries are going to go up with larger vehicles and faster speeds. Well, larger vehicles and faster speeds are both crummy environmental stewardship. You're talking more fossil fuels or more energy used to get from A to B than you would have otherwise. Interpersonal violence category. Well, okay, heat waves brought on by this heating planet, that's going to make people irritable and angry. But so will exposure to different neurotoxic chemicals that affect our nervous systems and are going to make us irritable and angry. It's kind of like substance abuse. If somebody's abusing a substance, they're often going to get irritable and angry. They say at the end of the Lancet article that the best way to cut down on all these pollution deaths, one of them is just a rapid transition towards renewable energy, wind, solar, okay, as well as, making agriculture sustainable, considering environment and all the planning, okay, like, if you're addressing cancer, you're not just talking about finding medical cures, you want to lower the exposure to all these chemicals. That means waste reduction. That means a more sustainable, more circular economy, less wasteful. I mean, basically, they're describing a Green New Deal. So why isn't this Lancet study that 9 million people are dying annually from pollution bigger news? Why isn't their solutions bigger news? For the same reason, all these environmental stories are underreported. For the same reason, environmental solutions are always mocked and put down among certain sets of the media like Fox or One America News or those kind of places, and just kind of backburnered in other outlets like maybe NPR. It's kind of on the back burner. Well, because these industries, we're talking about fossil fuel petrochemical, plastics, pesticides, big agriculture. These are some powerful industry with a lot who donate loads of money to politicians, and they got connections to media. That's why this stuff is downplayed. So average people, you got to wake up to that. You got to have your North Star. You want a greener, less polluting economy. And when you go to vote, you got to think, well, who's at least more responsive to that? And some of these other issues, you got to think, maybe I'm just being manipulated here, or maybe not. Maybe it's sincere, but they don't all have to be tied together all the time. And what I'm saying here is the Republican Party, whether you agree with them on some stuff or not, are locked down by that fossil fuel industry. They get way more donations from them. And anytime you had Republicans who try to run greener or warn about climate change, they get primaried. The primaries have been funded by different, reckless elements of the business community. So that's the situation we're dealing with here. Hey, I hope you found this video helpful, thought-provoking, maybe a little entertaining and interesting. Please make sure you're commenting, you're liking. We can keep this conversation going. And until now, you're subscribing. And until next time, please donate at Patreon. It'd be nice if I got another one donating at Patreon. Thank you, Environmental Coffee House. And until next time, as always, hey, peace be with you.